there's a lot of kind of doom mongering about AI and what it's going to do to the world. I've been through a cycle myself of thinking, oh God, we're all doomed. And now I've come through the other side. I can see how that plays through economically, and I think actually we're not. There'll be some choppy waters in the short term. But I think the more interesting thing about AI is the other capabilities that are unlocked.
Welcome back to Property Perspectives. I'm Ashley Toy, I'll be your host. This series we're looking at the main sectors across real estate, and in this episode we're doing a look future forward across all of the episodes with Richard Pickering from Cushman Wakefield. This series I'll be joined by Tom Sharman, who's our Head of Research and Strategy. So Richard, you started your life as a solicitor briefly and then hopped into surveying, and you've been at Cushman for about 20 years now. But I think it might be helpful for everyone if you could just, I guess, explain a bit more about what your role is,
Sure.
and what I guess we're going to talk about today.
Look, I like interesting and different things. So I've been at Cushman's for 20 years, as you said, but I've had 5 very different jobs in that period, from agency through consulting. I manage strategy for our UK business, innovation for our European business, and then this latest job is as Director of Strategic Foresight and Intelligence for our EMEA and APAC businesses. So it's about thinking long range, thinking about beyond the cycle, thinking about the things that could impact on the value of our clients' assets or how they should compete or operate in their markets. Never a dull day, lots of things to think about at the moment, particularly, and yeah, great to be invited to this podcast. Thank you, Ash.
Well, you win the competition for best title.
Thank you.
Big business card.
Yeah.
Long business card.
It is too long.
So I guess if we could start on Resi, and I guess I'll hand over to you. So let's fast forward 10 or 15 years. What are the trends and big themes that you think we're going to see in residential?
Yeah. So I mean, there are a number of ways we could look at this. I mean, I think one is you could look at underlying demand, and Resi is a very close proxy to population trends, and I think we are going to see, even on a very slow burn change, some changes to demographic and population over, did you say 30-year horizon? So
10 or 15, we'll take any horizon.
We'll go to 30.
Yeah, we'll go, yeah.
I mean, certainly over that longer horizon, we've got quite a significant challenge brewing globally, I think, in that natural population growth is declining, and that is, say, a close proxy for residential demand. Meanwhile, we're seeing immigration still high, particularly on kind of major global cities like London, and so that kind of balances out. Whether we see additional migration through climate challenges and things like that remains to be seen, so that's something certainly to watch for. But within that kind of category, we're also seeing the demographic change, so shifting towards an older population who have different housing needs to those who are a younger generation, particularly kind of when combined with like operational care needs, etc., in that older age bracket. And I think I read recently about 80% of housing wealth is held by people over 55 years of age. And that's not, kind of shows that silver buying power, but it's obviously very relevant to that sector. Yeah. Now, whether we see that wealth recycled, again, is another interesting question. Yeah. So that's kind of the underlying frame of demand, but then I guess there's other factors to overlay onto that. I sort of hinted at one, which is the more operationalisation of residential, growth of institutional residential, but also kind of specific care, student, and other products, co-living products that I think will all continue to grow in scale over that period. Yeah. And then beyond that, you've got the kind of how does it work? How does the kind of market trade? Yeah. What does liquidity look like? What's the length of tenure that people hold housing for? Obviously, in the UK, we're quite different to a lot of our continental European colleagues in terms of how that market structure works.
Well, how does so one of the trends that's been quite global and quite clear over the last 100 years, I guess, is urbanisation. Populations gravitating towards the largest urban centres. Does that change in a world where, perhaps not a world, but in this country, for example, where the population is getting older? Do you think that's something that will change? Do you think an older population is less likely to continue urbanisation?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Tom. I mean, I think there are 2 different kind of perspectives on that. Some people are actually saying urbanisation, elderly populations promote urbanisation, and that we're seeing kind of return to CBD markets for older generations who want amenity access in that kind of later kind of life stages. I think what's really interesting, because I completely agree with you, if you looked on any global megatrends report, urbanisation is going to be right up there. And that's dominated by, the Asian, South Asian populations, Africa certainly.
Okay.
If you look at the UK, we're about 85% urbanised. So 85% of people in the UK live in what we classify as an urban area.
Yeah.
And that's right at the top globally, really. We're one of the highest urbanised countries, and some academics at least theorise that that's kind of at an upper limit, that we couldn't go more so. I think the Maldives is 99% urbanised, but other than, or Vatican or so, but in a major mature market, 85% is say some a theoretical upper limit.
Okay.
Now, interestingly, I said before, natural population growth going down, immigration going up. Immigration tends to be focused on cities.
Yep.
People don't come into our countries and live in villages typically.
Yeah.
So that might push towards greater urbanisation. But against that, we've seen some level of deurbanisation following kind of COVID and the ability to, live at more distance from your workplace.
But there's a kind of anecdotally, and again, it's I guess dangerous to use anecdotes, but anecdotally, there's been a slight reversal of that deurbanisation. So you had a lot of, for example, people moving out of London, buying houses in the countryside, and living the good life, and then realising actually it was a bit of a pain in the backside to get back into London for work, etc. Yeah. So is that? Do you think that was just a temporary blip driven by the pandemic?
For some, certainly. I mean, I think there was a reactionary spike from some people who thought this opened up a new kind of bucolic life in the kind of the. In kind of leafy kind of countryside, and that has reset as the world normalised. I think it's easy to forget. People actually thought COVID was going to last forever, right? And it obviously didn't, thankfully. I think for some it's more permanent. I mean, I think we're seeing now a permanent subset of itinerant workers who are basically footloose and could move not just to the countryside but to another country or anywhere, and they're much less geographically tied, I think. Now, again, that, it kind of juxtaposes with the whole discussion about the future of work, etc. But I think for some people, that will become a more persistent state. And I think the reason for that is that particularly the large global cities are failing some of their citizens. I mean, I think we all love cities for the kind of excitement and the amenity that cities bring, the agglomeration, serendipity, those kind of impacts. But we have been systemically failing to deliver the right amount of infrastructure in our cities, whether that's transport, schools, hospitals, other things that particularly when you combine increased density in those cities, which has been another trend, not just urbanisation, but densification of cities, it kind of clusters that activity into a very narrow pool of supply, which means that our infrastructure is overloaded. Okay. And I think that some people are making an active vote to live differently. Now, if you were someone who was working 5 days a week in the office in 2019, that you're very tied by those commuting patterns. If you're now working 2 or 3 days a week, you probably can say to yourself, well, I can take a longer commute on those days that I'm going to be in. So I don't get me wrong, I don't see any massive deurbanised, I don't think we're all going to live as hermits in villages going forward. But I think it just does temper some of those previous growth trends and urbanisation trends we've seen, particularly combined with that limit.
Sorry, Ash, how does, so you mentioned that sometimes in some ways cities are failing their citizens. How do you, when ownership of kind of land and real estate is often very kind of disaggregated, how do you, create the infrastructure that's required and reshape the cities in the way that works for the future?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the prevailing theory has been densification. That's what that has been best practice for the last kind of 50 years, pretty much. And actually, in Europe, we've been more in advance of that trend than the Americas, for instance, who are still kind of plagued by urban sprawl. Australasia similarly. So, densification was the right strategy. I still maintain that. I don't think the way we've delivered densification has always been the best way. We've delivered it through large towers, typically, with then swathes of land around them to kind of balance. I think the best examples of densification are that kind of mid-rise you see in like maybe, if we're in London today, obviously maybe areas like Bayswater, etc. Or if you're in Paris, that's a great example of kind of 5-storey densification.
So kind of Edwardian, Georgian era kind of building was the right way to do it. Exactly,
and there are various kind of academic theories which say that at that level of density, that kind of 5-storey with kind of enclosed spaces, people feel more ownership over the city than they do with kind of, vast towers and kind of then swathes of open land. And that vests them in the future. And it also creates communities at that point, identifiable communities which anchor people to place. So I think that's important. But I'm afraid, I think probably the answer is that we just haven't delivered the right infrastructure. And here's the challenge, right? Because often infrastructure sits at grade level. You can make roads at underground and above ground, but it's much more expensive and it's challenging to deliver. You can't make a park above ground level. You can have roof terraces and things, but so a lot of the infrastructure we need to make is at ground floor level, which means it's very difficult to deliver in a world that's densifying. And I think either we've got to get used to a culture and a philosophy more like the Asians, who are happy to work at multi-level structures. Otherwise, we just need to spend more on infrastructure. I guess I think perhaps we've not been good enough. We were actually chatting about this earlier, right? We need to think about what investments do we need to make for the long term, and what is the immediate pressing need today. If we make the right long-term investments, they will return to us in due course. But that sits against political cycles and investment cycles, which are always challenging, right?
So if I could just take us back, I guess, to something you mentioned at the beginning of this, that I guess the silver pound or retirement, as we broadly call the sector. So we're probably at the first throes of how we think about that. In the long term, other countries like New Zealand are probably much further ahead. But do you see us getting more to that kind of model where you have an all-encompassing provision for sort of later living?
I think that later living will be more operationalised, certainly. I think whether that needs to be in a central care structure or whether it can be in a more decentralised model, I think is debatable. Most people don't want to leave their home, is the kind of truth of the matter, unless they have acute care needs. And so therefore I think a model that anticipates ageing but allows people to live not in designated care homes is probably a good solution. And that could be retrofit on existing real estate, or it could be bespoke products, as we've seen in some sections of the market. But they need to increasingly be embedded with the technology infrastructure that links back to a central operation. I think that's probably where we are going with it. Obviously people are living longer in retirement now than they used to, although the retirement age is steadily creeping up, it seems. But people are living longer in retirement as they live for longer, and as they hold the wealth, I think they'll be willing to spend some of that on bespoke kind of age products. But I would say it's not just the bricks and mortar, it's the technology infrastructure, it's the operations, it's the service provision that sits alongside that. And I think unless you look at it as a bundle, you're not looking at the full picture.
Yeah, and I guess part of that market might function as the rented market. So the rented market, I guess, has featured more in recent years as house price dynamics have moved around. Do you see that as a long-term trend? I guess thinking about our European peers and how they think about residential.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, I think, particularly, if you look at the generation who would be going into aged care now, they're a generation who paid off their mortgages probably some time ago, and they've benefited from house price growth in that period. Maybe some of them haven't downsized yet, they're still living in a family type home. And I think having more tailored products that then allow them to release cash for the next generation, who are increasingly facing those capital pressures, is attractive, and it obviously then makes investment and inheritance planning more fluid. So yeah, I could see how rented products in that upper age bracket would certainly be more suitable, and also that allows you to then predict. It allows you to have a central delivery of some of those kind of capital spend that are needed to upgrade those properties without having to own that and deliver it yourself within your own home. Yeah. So I could certainly see the attractiveness of that.
And I guess we butt up against the infrastructure point you were making earlier. I guess there's single family, but as you use the American phrase, the multi-family model, which tends to be the high-rise towers, and that will bring with it the infrastructure challenge. So,
indeed, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I guess we've talked about urbanisation, densification of cities. Industrial feels like a next logical place maybe to go, and how the industrial market has kind of evolved in recent years to service the last mile a bit better. And so I guess, how do you see that panning out over the same kind of time horizon?
Yeah, I mean, industrial I think is quite a unique asset type in real estate, in that it's primarily not a people place. It's primarily a product place. It's somewhere to stock inventory. And for that reason, it becomes very focused on operational efficiency. Supply chains are essentially just complex flows of product across, multiple nodes in a system. And I think if you look at the trends that might shape that going forward, I mean, we haven't spoken about it yet, but AI is going to be massively impactful. AI is very good at managing complex systems like supply chains. So I think if you think through the kind of things that might unlock, certainly greater visibility of infrastructure, of inventory across the supply chain. We've had attempts at that through our RFID and other kind of systems, but it hasn't ever been comprehensive. And it hasn't really been, it hasn't had the insights that sit around it that allow a system to remap a network in real time. And I think that's the really interesting opportunity going forward, is can we move to a truly dynamic supply chain where we're not reliant on constant buffering of inventory in warehouses, and we have a much more fluid flow that is rerouted in real time through AI. So I think that's certainly a possibility. I think the other trend you point to is kind of last mile logistics, and the kind of it's obviously driven by e-commerce, and I think AI will unlock greater prediction in those markets. So at the moment, what happens typically, or traditionally what's happened, is the customer sends a signal, I want product. Eventually it gets to the manufacturer says, right, make product, and by the time the manufacturer's made the product, shipped to the customer, maybe the customer doesn't need it anymore. Yep. And that creates overstocking, understocking, etc. Increasingly, AI will allow us to predict with accuracy what the customer will need in the future. One of my colleagues, our head of logistics, actually gave a really neat example of this to me recently, which was about marathons and shoes.
Yep.
And we all know where the global marathons are, and therefore sensibly you would ship shoes to those places within 2 weeks of that marathon happening. I thought it was a really good example. But that could apply to many, many things, and particularly those who have the data infrastructure and platforms, name a few of them obviously. They will get much more sophisticated at pre-positioning inventory closer to the consumer, such that they can satisfy demand quickly when it arises without having to overstock inexpensive locations.
So I guess, what does that then do to values and leases? As you're talking, I'm trying to think, do the big boxes suddenly become less attractive because you become more efficient with mid-sized boxes, and do leases become shorter because you're trying to be a bit more nimble with kind of where you're locating kit on the last mile?
Well, I think if you play it through, I think certainly last mile becomes more important and therefore has value accretion. I think for the kind of the mega sheds, the big boxes, I think it's very much location dependent. So what will happen if the network reoptimizes, as it probably will do, it's happened before, is that some locations will grow in value and some will reduce in value. And therefore, if you're in the right location, you probably see a doubling down of value, and then there may be some that suffer locational obsolescence because they're not in the right spot anymore. So I think we haven't seen that play through yet to know which ones are which. But that would be, I guess, a thesis for a bifurcated market would be a thesis. I think also, those sheds won't just serve the same purpose that they've done historically. It won't just be a case of, well, let's just drop a load of inventory there and then decide where we ship it next. There'll be more intelligent nodes that are more dynamic. There'll be inventory coming and going much more regularly. They may even become like live fulfillment led platforms. So no longer leased to one operator, or to one customer, but maybe leased to an operator who is filling by the pallet on a live basis. Where then the kind of it's not a lease anymore; it's a kind of fractional kind of use of the space, and it's not just real estate; it's the whole fulfillment service, the packing and the robotics and all of those kind of things. So again, I mean, and I think this is a broader theme actually across multiple sectors, but I think what new technologies like this do are they focus value. So they don't destroy value; they refocus it. So some assets will rise in value. The ones that can fulfill the new demand, and those who can't will will struggle with relevance.
Yeah, the challenge always, I guess, is with the last mile element is that the timing and the location obviously is at the whim of the end consumer. So it's I guess even with AI you can help to predict patterns, but essentially if you're offering next day or even same day delivery, then it's up to the whim of the customer exactly when and where that goes, which makes it hard. You know, retailers are, I think, slightly pushing back, so multi-channel retailers are slightly pushing back on the, I guess, era of having everything delivered and everything available and delivery for free, trying to get people either to pay for delivery or to kind of come out to shops and get it themselves. How do you think that it's inexorable that more and more goods will be fulfilled online, or do you think we'll end up at a kind of, I guess, a happy medium, I suppose, where people are still going out to shops and picking some stuff up themselves?
Yeah, I don't see it as binary, certainly, and I guess I would look at the role of those facilities. You know, logistics, last mile delivery is servicing a fulfillment role. It's servicing the delivery of the product to the customer. But that's not what retail is. That's a small subset of retail. You know, retail encompasses brand engagement, product awareness, intention to buy. You know, the contract itself, after sales services.
Yeah.
A lot of retail is services still. So I think you've got to look at it in that broader context. And I think, yes, it stands to reason that some of that fulfillment will continue to be delivered by the online channel because it's convenient to pick it, and people do default to convenience as a kind of axiom. So I think that will continue to play a role, and I don't think that trend has fully played through yet. But I think, I think each format needs to play to its relative advantages.
Yeah.
You know, I think the mistake that some stores make is try to position themselves like essentially as a website that you can walk into, and that's a mistake because the website will always win. So if you think through what a store has been always good at, I mean, the big thing it's been good at historically is product placement and also immediacy of product. You can go in and got it, pick it up, gone. Most people don't value that immediacy if the alternative is a day.
Yes.
So that's an interesting point. But stores have also been good at, you know, the actual engagement with the product. You know, you can actually try it on, you can feel it. You know, it's the kind of the squeezing the avocados test and you know, the things like that. And also the learning about the product and the brand and deciding whether you want to be a part of that. You know, if you look at the end-to-end like value chain of a retailer, like a big cost is customer acquisition. That's nothing to do with the sale of a product.
Yeah.
It's the idea that customer might buy from you repeatedly in the future. And I do still think stores have an advantage on that. And then if you start to play through some new trends here, you know, one of the things that I think has made online attractive in recent years has been actually it has a personalisation advantage over stores. So if you go onto Amazon and you're already logged in and got cookies in your browser, it says, you know, Tom, hey, welcome back. You know, here are 5 products you bought from us recently. Here's some new ones you might want to buy from us. Like you go into a shop and someone might kind of say hello or might not, and there's no chance they're going to give you that kind of level of engagement. But we are seeing some retailers now, you know, increasingly deploy apps that ping when you go in. That's got your back catalogue of stuff, data that's been through your online dealings with that organisation. And I think what then gets really exciting is what AI now unlocks in store, because previously, you know, it's a one-size-fits-all approach. You know, now it can be an approach where you go in, you ping one of the beacons. It says, you know, a screen comes up in front of you. Hey Tom, good to see you again. Here's what you bought online last time. Would you like to show me some of the products that you can buy in store? Or hey, I've got your sizing from this previous discussion we had. Would you like me to drop this clothing into the changing room for you to try on your size? Mm-hmm. And you won't get that level of nuanced interaction online. Yeah. And also then the data from the store could be much more. You know, you're clicking online, you're experiencing, you're smiling, you're doing other things in store. Obviously there's data privacy issues there, but I do think that's the role of the store going forward, is that kind of high value customer engagement. And I think that won't suit all stores, but it will provide an accretion of value to the ones that can deliver that.
And that enables, I guess, that kind of processing of the data enables the stores to stock the appropriate things for the catchment area in a more accurate way.
Completely. I mean, to kind of reverse back into our previous discussion, I do actually think the store may have a role in the fulfillment, the logistics side. I mean, they are urban logistics, and there's a lot of back of house space in stores that's become quite low value in recent years, and I do see stores that have, you know, access logistical potential suddenly being able to retain value in that back space, particularly I think on not just on the outbound but also on the returns side of it, and, you know, around after sales and other things. We could even see, I think, in retail a level of personalisation that we haven't seen historically, again enabled by AI, whereby, well, certainly I've talked to you about how I think the experience could be personalised, but even we could move into a world where the product now starts to be personalised. I mean, you see that in a very small scale with like screen printing T-shirts or baseball caps. You know, why couldn't you go into a jewellery store and design a new ring with the jeweller, and then maybe there's maker space on site that could even customise that for you. Particularly with robotics, I think that in some SKUs that might be a possible thing going forward.
And how does this, I guess, progress with virtual reality, augmented reality, glasses? And I guess we're still in the like figuring it out stage. It's still pretty expensive, but over a 20-30 year horizon, it should become materially less expensive. Technology gets better, more engagement from retailers. Do you still think you get that trend regardless of how, I guess, that product set evolves?
Yeah, I mean, I think the in-store trend isn't reliant on spatial computing, AI, etc. I think that people will like the real-world experience, but probably with digital screens that can kind of display personalised media, essentially. In the store.
It's interactive in-store rather than sit at home on your sofa, put some glasses on type.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I mean, I default when I kind of get questions like to think, well, what would I want? And I think I'd probably speak for you guys as well to say it would feel a better experience. Retail,
certainly to me, yes.
If the point is I want to buy, I don't know, some pencils, and I click online, I'm just going to do that online. No point going to buy some pencils. Yeah. If it was a kind of something that was a high value purchase or something that's very personal to me, I think I'd want to still feel and touch it. I mean, I do think AR has a role to play, certainly going forwards, in many sectors actually. But I think it feels a bit clunky today. You know, I know Meta are doing some great work on glasses, and obviously Apple have kind of moved into that space also with their kind of spatial headsets. I think where we'll start to really see that becoming seriously interesting is when that moves to contact lenses. And there are some contact lens prototypes that are essentially heads-up displays, like the Terminator, if you imagine that. But they're not commercially viable yet at scale. But that's presumably a matter of time. I mean, whether you all want to have a heads-up display, like, I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, I just don't think the experience of AI is good enough yet. But that's not to say it won't be.
No, absolutely. I guess the unknown is like, what are our children going to be doing as they go through school that becomes way more normalised to the experiences we have, that they'll be the ones shopping in kind of 30 years' time.
Sure, I agree.
So we've kind of got quite deep into retail there. There is one bit of, I guess, industrial I just wanted to make sure we didn't skip over. So the spec of an industrial unit, I guess in any sense, and the power requirement, it's already being talked about today, but I guess to what extent do you think we need to be looking way further forward in the future now to make sure all of these places are ready for what's to come?
Look, I mean, I think as a general comment, I think you always should be looking forward into the future because that is a critical determinant of the obsolescence rate of your asset if you haven't predicted something. And I think, I mean, the obvious trend that I think I would pick up from your question is automation, robotics. And yeah, I mean, that feels obvious to me. That feels very obvious. I mean, already, Amazon have got fully automated warehouses. I think many other logistics providers have that potential also. And in some cases it's more political than it is technological, whether you have human staff in those centres. But I think we should get ready for a world where warehouses are fully 99% automated and there's a skeleton crew there. And so if I guess the question is, you don't need the power today, but you need the ability to connect to it in the future. And so if I was an investor or a lender, for instance, thinking about, future obsolescence risk, I'd be looking at how capable is this asset of connecting to power or other infrastructure going forward? It doesn't need it today, but how capable of it? How capable will it be in the future?
Yeah.
And I guess we shouldn't assume it's always capable, right? I mean, we've seen big kind of redevelopment projects across the UK and other countries being turned down because of lack of power. So this is a hard constraint going forward. It's not a theoretical one anymore.
Yeah, because it's not just warehouses, it's data centres, obviously a hugely key one at the minute, and AI increases that kind of demand exponentially, as I understand it. But also all new housing where kind of gas boilers are going out and, you know, electric kind of heating's coming in, electric cars, etc. There's a huge burden on power that we don't seem to have the kind of the pipeline for at the minute. Like how, you know, 20, 30, 40 years out, how do we manage what seems to be, you know, an inexorable increase in demand for power?
I mean, I think we'll see a massive restructuring of our power networks in the next 10 years. I think it's going to be one of the biggest themes, actually. So, I mean, you're right to say data centres are driving an element of that. AI obviously driving data centres to some degree. But, you know, it sits on the back, of course, for greater renewables anyway. And I think this may be the precipitative driver of actually the need to invest in that, in transforming the grid. So that would be largely a transformation from fossil energy to sustainable sources, which are becoming more viable in many cases. Again, I think AI maybe has a role to play in that. You know, renewables are fine when it's like 10-20% of the grid. When it's 80% of the grid, that's a problem because they're not reliable enough. Whereas AI can help kind of smooth those peaks and demands of power and increase the reliability of the system. But, you know, longer term renewables have a total life cost that's much lower than fossil energy. And therefore, not only do we will see increased power capability, we'll see it at a lower output of carbon at a lower cost to the consumer. And I think that's got to be one of the amazing things that's going to come out of the next decade. I do believe that will happen. You know, I think AI is a bit of a balanced equation on this. You know, AI is obviously driving demand for energy right now, which is kind of, you know, a negative trend towards power consumption. But over the long run, I think it has immense potential as part of a package of activities to support reliable, sustainable, cheap energy.
Yeah. And I guess just taking us back into, I guess, residential there, one of the theories, I guess, about the future is that your car will become your, I guess, last meter storage for your energy. And how do we make sure we integrate that into the home and how we think about parking? We're probably not there yet, but it feels like it might be a feature of the future.
You know, I'd never heard that, but it sounds a really interesting idea. I mean, I think battery storage is certainly a part of the future, and particularly if you're playing with renewables, which tend to be variable. Obviously, there's central storage, but then I think decentralised storage through batteries is going to be a big thing. Obviously, Elon Musk backed that trend a long time ago, and he's usually prescient about these kind of things. And obviously, one of the biggest batteries people have in their homes tends to be their car now if they've got an electric or hybrid car. So I do definitely see that as a trend. I think some level of off-grid power capability is also an option. We have seen kind of pilots of that where local communities perhaps generate solar and then trade it locally with blockchain, and I think that provides another, particularly where there's a good source of local renewables. I think that provides another option for that. Now, whether people will own cars in the future, that's a different question. It's the second biggest asset most people buy, and it's the least used.
And it's incredibly inefficient, isn't it, for everybody to have a car effectively be run. So on the technology point and the efficient use of assets, I guess, offices, you know, we've been through a period of time post-COVID where there's a lot of kind of navel gazing about offices and, you know, do people need offices in the future when you can work anywhere? You touched on it before, digital nomads, you can work anywhere. We seem to have coalesced in the short term at least around a kind of, you know, people will be in the office 2, 3, 4 days a week to work together with the team, and they'll be remote elsewhere. So do you think, though, given how much video conferencing technology has come on in the last 10 years, projecting forward 10, 20, 30 years, are we going to just come back into this argument again at some point?
Well, first of all, I agree with your assessment there, Tom. I think it feels. I mean, the data shows that hybrid has seemingly plateaued at about 3 days a week. Is what most people seem to think, and so the shock is now kind of taken out of the market on that. I would say, and you'll have seen the data on this, there's quite strong variance between regions, and there's also very strong variance between functional roles within businesses. So that kind of 3-day figure disguises some ups and downs in there. Now, why has that happened? Well, I think 2 main reasons. I think one is that people have, none of us knew anything about this like 5 years ago. We all went through this experiment. I think most of us have now settled on a kind of level of work that we think is the optimum for ourselves, particularly if you're in a senior incentivized role. You do what is going to maximise your productivity. So that's certainly a part of this. I think the bigger part, though, let's be honest, is that the implicit negotiation between employer and employee seems to have found its natural kind of touch point. Most employers still value the control function that an office provides, and haven't got comfortable yet with the idea that remote can provide that same level of control and coordination. So it's kind of plateaued there for now. So that was kind of the initial piece. Yeah. Your then question relates to how will technology maybe change that in the future? So what I think it will require a step change, is what I would say. So having slightly sharper webcams or quicker internet, that's not going to be enough, I don't think. I think most of us don't really care if the person on the other end of the Teams call is blurry a bit. I don't think it increases the benefit of the call. I think probably back to Ash's point earlier about kind of AR and other technologies like that. That's probably where you'd be looking to for the step change. And what people are trying to do here is people are more likely to switch if the virtual world represents higher fidelity to the real world. Yeah. Now, what I would say is I think that bar is probably higher than maybe some technologists assume it is. I think we've all found that there are just things that have better social chemistry in person, and I don't think that is going to be. Well, sorry, long term, yes, maybe, but that would require significant technological uplift. In the shorter term, I don't think that's the case. There is another technology angle here, I think, which again is AI. AI is the answer to most things these days, but I think that angle is the kind of jobs, the kind of tasks, should I say, that we do in an office is going to change in the next 10 years. Increasingly our work activities are going to skew away from the execution of cognitive output, and they're going to skew towards things that are more human in nature: sales, decision making, judgment under uncertainty, those kind of things. So if you say, well, actually the role of the office in the future is going to be more those kind of things, in fact you need to probably be in for those kind of things. I've heard a lot of people say AI is going to be dehumanising on work. I think they've got it completely wrong. AI is going to take out the unhuman elements of work, the factory kind of work processes, and it's going to focus on the more human interactive roles. And I think the economy will rebalance around those, and the floor space will rebalance around those principles. Yeah,
it's interesting. You touched upon earlier cars and how how inefficient it is for everybody to own their own car, and it's kind of so. Thinking about the same kind of themes in office space, if you're using AI to effectively work out the optimum way to be together and times and tasks to do, that suggests a kind of ebb and flow of demand within an organisation, which clashes then with the 20-year lease and a fixed amount of space. Yeah. So how do you see that kind of evolving? Is there kind of some kind of subscription model like we see with music and news, etc.? How does it work? Yeah,
I think there's 2 reasons why AI might drive that volatility. I think in the short term, it's because no one really knows. Anyone who tells you they knows, I think, is probably trying to sell you something. But I think no one really knows what the impact of AI is going to be on offices yet. We can take some good guesses, but I think in the short term they'll be hedging against what might be a future position, and so that will create some level of uncertainty in the kind of portfolio strategy of occupiers. I think downstream of that, once we get into BAU, when the new world kind of arrives, I think that what AI does is it will decrease decision cycles. So projects will get spun up quicker, they'll get spun down quicker. There'll be a higher level of contingent workforce within any business that'll play to that digital nomad trend. And so for that reason, I think not necessarily less space, but more volatile workforce and spatial needs.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I would see flex becoming a more structural component of portfolio composition for occupiers in the future. Not only because actually of the spatial flexibility, but also because of the operational bundle that comes with that.
Yeah.
So particularly AI is going to bring new occupancy requirements to buildings. How people use and work in buildings is going to be different. How the data is protected, the cybersecurity, all of these things work. I don't think a lot of occupiers will want to take on the full burden of that. I think there'll be some expectation of landlords to do that, and obviously that's more. It can be more deliverable in some sort of flexible product. So, whether it's I remember back in the day there were kind of suggestions of like we go down to hourly bookings of offices, and I mean maybe again one day maybe as AI kind of flexes that through, but I think we'll see just a steady growth in general flex, more traditional flex products as we move forward in response to that point.
So we've talked a lot about AI, I understand a bit. Is there anything about AI that you think we haven't hit on here that we should be talking about or should be thinking about at least?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I would just guard your listeners against is thinking AI is just a jobs story. There's a lot of kind of doom mongering about AI and what it's going to do to the world. I've been through a cycle myself of thinking, oh God, we're all doomed. And now I've come through the other side. I can see how that plays through economically, and I think actually we're not. There'll be some choppy waters in the short term. But I think the more interesting thing about AI is the other capabilities that it unlocks. It's not just automation. I mean, we talked about personalisation at scale, for instance. That's, I think, a massive benefit of AI, and not just something that improves efficiency. It's something that improves our lives. It makes everything more tailored to our needs. So that's another huge benefit. And then just the computational benefit. Like, we're going to see things become possible that were science fiction historically. And I think particularly as we maybe move towards the end of the 10-year kind of horizon towards a period where quantum computing might become a more viable option, we're going to see the radical reinvention of systems, finance systems certainly, also healthcare systems, and there are going to be medical breakthroughs, for instance, that we just didn't think were possible as little as 5 years ago. And I think that should give us a lot of cause for hope around the future. And then bringing that back to a kind of real estate perspective, all of those industries have supply chains that will need space in different offices, warehouses, shops. So I think when you look back at previous industrial cycles, like the Industrial Revolution as an example of that, you always tend to go through a kind of choppy water, like a period where reskilling, the market adjusts, and then in every single previous cycle, we've seen greater GDP at the end of it. Eventually, we've seen a rebalancing of the distribution of that GDP, and we've seen greater need for products, people, real estate. Even some new real estate typologies developed. I mean, factories didn't exist until the Industrial Revolution. Cities were, suburbs were really made by the train. So it'd be interesting to see what new products that we haven't even talked about today might come out of this period ahead of us.
And that is a really nice, positive place to leave the episode. Thank you very much, Richard. That's it for another episode of Property Perspectives. If you've enjoyed, please click like and subscribe.